Hello, folks. I'd like to start this one off with I'd like to mention Pope Francis. Um, I'd like to start this one off just a little bit different, but in recognition of the life of Pope Francis, I would just like to say that I don't know too much of his life, but um, I do know. I remember about a year ago. I had heard about where he had went to. I believe it was Indonesia. Maybe a couple of years ago now. And I listened to some of the things that he had to say whenever he was there, and he was saying some what I imagine would have been considered, and turned out later it was some pretty far out there stuff for the traditional Christian. Let's say he was touching on some third coming stuff. Dare I say what he was saying when he went to Indonesia that time. And I remember after that, wasn't too long after that, they said that I guess some of the more traditional heads in the church had to kind of walk back what he had said. It was a little bit too much for him. But anyway, I never forgot that. So I would just say, as far as popes go, of course, we all came from the Protestant side of it, and et cetera, et cetera. And we're all the way up here in the third coming and stuff, but it is all related to some degree, and it's all Christendom to some degree, if for no other reason historical. But let's just say, I would say, as far from what I know of it, as popes go, I think he was probably a pretty good one. So I just thought that I would mention him. And also the wife, in respect for his life, but and also the wife. We was watching about how that they're going to have to, of course, elect a new pope, and they've got 4 in the running, and I think one's from Ghana, one's from the Philippines, one's from Hungary, and one's from Italy. And so anyway, Kathy, my wife, is Team Pope Philippines. So we're Team Pope from the Philippines. I don't know what the guy's name. I can't remember his name. What is it, bishop or cardinal or what he is? But anyway, so go Team Pope from the Philippines for the next Pope. But anyway. So thought I'd mention that, and so anyway, what am I going to preach about today? Well, hopefully I can bring this out smoothly. But what I wanted to preach on today is oneness and Trinitarianism. Oddly enough, after having talked about the Pope and the Catholic Church and the Protestants and all that, here I go into a good old-fashioned oneness and Trinitarian sermon. But I don't mean oneness and Trinitarianism in terms of the old Catholic and Protestants and et cetera, I mean, I'm talking about third coming oneness and Trinitarianism. But I'm going to have to go back to explain what I want to explain. And so I imagine somebody would say, "Oh, wait, Brother Cook, you're not going to preach on politics today?" Well, yeah, I am. I am. I'm going to use politics to explain it too, because there's a way that politics is running right along with what we're doing what we had been doing in the church, or the third coming church, if you want to call it that. I remember one time, and this may have predated Don Parnell. Probably did. I assume this goes back to William Branham. But anyway, I remember Don Parnell used to always say, as I recall, he would say that you could not unveil something until it had been finished. It was a finished work. As in, like if you had a sculpture, you couldn't pull the thing off of it until the sculpture was completely done. So sometimes these things have to run their course before you can unveil them. And so anyway, I have a bit of an unveiling today of what I have found that has went on amongst us in the post third coming and post third coming world. Basically, I had thought, I had everything, I had the Branhamites being the Baptists, the Third Coming being the Pentecostals, in general, and then what I've been saying, I have related to a modern William Branham. Okay, but I left one out. I had to think about it. There's really one in between there that I left out, and it kind of okay. It's kind of like if you know 13 sign astrology, you got 12 sign astrology and 13 sign astrology, and Sagittarius, contained within the sign of Sagittarius, is Ophiuchus. The first 10 days of the sign of the 30 days of Sagittarius is Ophiuchus, but Ophiuchus is, I think it's a serpent bearer, but it is part of Sagittarius. So you can say, well, that person's a Sagittarius, and you would be right. Or you can say for the first 10 days of Sagittarius, basically, you can say, well, that person's an Ophiuchus. And yeah, that would be correct too. They're both correct, basically. But some people break it down more into a smaller sign there and don't just paint it with a broad brush and call it all Sagittarius. But it is all Sagittarius. So anyway, that's kind of what I'm going to get into today, is that the Pentecostal, the third coming, can be broke down a little bit more into you can break it down into a more of a sign within a sign we've had here is what I'm saying. Like, for example, the Pentecostal church, well, there was different branches of Pentecostal church, different branches of Baptist church as far as that goes. So, we could paint it all with a broad brush, or we could get into a little bit of detail. And so I'm going to get into a little bit of detail as to some stuff that I have seen going on here. Whenever I was growing up, I was really not a Branhamite. I was a Oneness apostolic, basically. Oneness apostolic are the people that believe in, they're Pentecostals, they believe in speaking in tongues and all this and that, same stuff. They come after the Pentecostals, basically. You had Pentecostals, Oneness apostolic, and then Branham. That's basically how it went. So there's one more. I never ever mentioned that one, and I got to thinking about it. But anyway, it needs to be put in and related to what we're doing now, related to what some people are doing now, to make the whole story jive a little better of what I'm trying to get across here. But anyway, so I was apostolic Oneness. My family was like diehard apostolic Oneness. They knew about William Branham. They read William Branham. But where I lived up in the holler where I lived, up down on the river where I lived, we had basically apostolic Oneness churches, but we didn't have Branham churches. As people knew about William Branham, we did. My family did, but they didn't go to a Branham church because there was no Branham church there, So all that there was an apostolic Oneness church. And so anyway, but the apostolic Oneness people believe in, just for short version, they believe that you got the Trinity, Trinitarians. Trinitarians believe in, essentially, for easy way of explaining it, they believe in baptized in the name of Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Okay, the Oneness people that came after them, the apostolic Oneness, they believed in baptized in the name of Lord Jesus Christ. Okay, and they believed in that the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost are all one. Because they believe that Scripture, John 10:30, I and my Father are one. Okay, so that's what they focus on. Okay, so they still understand the Trinity, of course, but they focus on oneness. Their primary focus is on oneness. Okay, so funny story. I got to tell this one. My dad is a very zealous type of person, and back in the day, probably like 30, 40 years ago, my mom told me, maybe 50 years ago now, my mom told me a story about how that my dad and some other guy, they had just, I guess, gotten into the whole oneness ideology, and they were like super zealous about it. And so anyway, there was these, I guess, Baptist or somebody was down on the river back home. They was down in the river having a baptismal. And so anyway, Dad and that other guy go down there and wreck their baptismal. because they go down there and they're like, no, you guys are baptizing. You're baptizing in the titles. You should be baptizing in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. It's all one. There's oneness. It's not three, And so anyway, albeit they may have been right for the time, but that's not what you do. You don't. They went down there and right in the middle of their baptismal. That was an unwise thing to do, to go engage in theological combat in the middle of the baptismal. That was probably not the time or place to have the theological debate over oneness and Trinitarianism. but anyway. So, but let's just say it was some wild times back in those days, Anyway, I could make an analogy, but they were wilder times, It's like I'll just go ahead and tell you. Like we look at it now, I think people have kind of calmed down now, in a way. They don't go out and do their drinking and cussing and swerping like they used to, It's used to hang out in the bars all the time, play poker and this and that, and they just don't do that much anymore. People stay home. I guess they, whatever, I mean, they still go out and do stuff, but back in the day, it was just, everywhere. So I guess the, back in like the 70s and stuff, in the 60s and back in them days, that was what they did. They went out and raised hell and wrecked cars and got drunk, and that's what they did, So anyway, I guess the church kind of was the same way, really, because, they were out, so to speak, raising hell in the church too, getting drunk in the spirit, and you know what I mean? Because it's all the same thing. We always analogize and getting drunk in a bar that's the same thing as going to a church and getting high in the spirit. It's the same thing. So anyway, but they get into bar fights, they get drunk and get into bar fights. Well, I guess that's what Dad and that other guy did. They got drunk on the spirit of that oneness message, and they wanted to get into a bar fight. So, a bar fight in the church is theological combat. The church version of bar fighting is theological combat, So anyway, so anyway, I was apostolic oneness, and eventually got into the whole Branham thing, blah, 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 blah. Okay, and, here I am. Here's the, third coming in on up now. Okay, all right. So I wanted to relate how all that stuff, recently at work, I got a new boss. My old boss, he had health problems, and we got a new boss now. Well, it turns out that this guy is an apostolic oneness, was a pastor, apostolic oneness pastor. Okay, so which is like, me and him were a little shocked, I think, to find that we had both had apostolic oneness roots, because there ain't that many oneness people around by relativity. There's 1 million Baptists, 1 million Pentecostals, but there ain't that many apostolic oneness people by comparison. So we were a little shocked at this. But anyway, talking to him, he got me to remember a few things about apostolic oneness that I hadn't really thought about for years, and kind of brought it back to my attention. And I got to thinking about apostolic oneness and Pentecostalism and all that, and I got to thinking about how it relates to the ideas that people had in the post-third coming world, and how it relates now. But anyway, I'll go back and then I'll go to that. So as I said, you had Trinitarians, Pentecostal Trinitarians basically. Then you had apostolic oneness. Okay. Well, here's what happened. We had, and this has been said before. I'm really going to just clarify some things. But this has been said before, that essentially what happened was at the split, and a lot of the split in the Third Coming Church was over this. I think this was probably the number one reason for the split, because what happened was, among other things, but this was, let's say theologically, this is probably the number one reason that, see, like I said, the third coming people, like third coming, like back in 2012, 2013, pre to that, those days, that was just like straight third comingism. Okay, that was before the split. Okay, then you had the split between basically what I had called the pardon the term, but the Parnellian side and the Bladesian side. Because you had Don Parnell and his couple that went with one side of it, his couple pastors that followed him, especially in the United States. And this happened in the Philippines too, I'm sure, and other places. And then you had Bill Blades, Glenn Dial, and I hope you don't mind me mentioning their names, but I'm just telling the stories. All I'm doing, and it ain't because you'll find out by the end of this. I actually ended up agreeing with both of them or disagreeing with both of them. But there was Bill Blades, Glenn Dial, and John Vela. Okay, so there was 3 pastors in the southern United States that went with one side, and when the third coming split, and there was 3 pastors basically that went with in the northern United States, if you could call it that went with Don Parnell's side of things. Okay, so it split right down the middle. And what it was over the concept of oneness and Trinitarianism, because what happened was, and I'm just going to, this is my rough explanation of everything, but correct me where I may be wrong, because I don't know the details of it, but I know enough to preach this probably. The Bill Bladesian side of it went with, their idea was more a traditional take on like good and evil, and good and evil. It was not just about good and evil. It was about how we looked at good and evil, but it was about how we looked at, was everybody eternal? If you didn't get the message, was you eternal? This or that, was you, of course, we'd kind of gotten out of the traditional views of heaven and hell. I don't know exactly how far they went with it, but anyway, but they had basically, to sum it up, they had more of a Trinitarian viewpoint, and this was what the Parnellian side was making a point on, and they were saying that they had a more Trinitarian viewpoint because they took the traditional viewpoint of things. And they had a more Trinitarian viewpoint because their viewpoint was that good and evil were not one. They were still 2 different things. They were, and when I say Trinitarian, it's not really, I'm not using 3 here, but it's multiple. It's basically one versus multiplicity. Okay, so Trinitarianism, if you want to make that basically just multiplicity, whether it could be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or whatever, versus just one. Okay, so anyway, the Bladesian side of it, their idea was more good and evil was separated. Good and evil was still, one was good, one was bad. It was more, if the traditional viewpoint, you had people who essentially were in hell or were in heaven, however you took heaven and hell at that point, whether it was the traditional viewpoint on heaven or hell, or the liberal viewpoint that we had gotten to, or whatever. But nonetheless, it was more of a Trinitarian idea, because Don Parnell's idea, by contrast, was, now correct me if I'm wrong, but roughly by contrast, was that everything was all one. It was that, and this was, I guess, kind of love divinism. Okay, but one of the premises of love divinism was this, that everything is all one, good and evil are all one. As he so famously preached in the church that time, in like 2013, before everybody split, and this was probably what started some of it, was that he said, he got up and he said, he was preaching one time, I never forget it. He got up and he said, the devil or Satan or Lucifer, I don't know how he referred to it, was the brother of Christ. Well, okay, you start doing that, that's when you really start potentially ruffling some feathers right there, because to say that the devil and Christ are brothers, that's what he said. It was basically that. Then that was a big deal, So anyway, and that was probably when the more traditional side of the church, of the Third Coming Church, started looking around and been like, I don't know about all this, And I was like, yeah. I was like, yeah, they're brothers,
Did you agree?
Huh?
You agree?
Yeah, I was probably one of the loudest amens. I meant to be one of the loudest amens in that room, because I didn't amen real loud. I never did, but that was one I meant to amen real loud on, because yes, at the time, and I believe at the time that was correct. So anyway, I think we can do better today, but that's what I intend to do. But anyway, that was the idea, was that in short order, was Don Parnell's side of it was, generally speaking, was that good and evil, God and Satan, the multiplicities that we had in the traditional viewpoints of the church was one. Okay, so he had oneness, and the other side, the more traditional side of the third coming, had a Trinitarian thought process on it, which basically equated to a modern Trinitarian thought process in third coming terms. Okay, so you had oneness and Trinitarianism all over again, because see, that's what you had back in the day. They were all Pentecostals. Okay, everybody down there was third coming, but you had third coming Trinitarians and third coming oneness is what it turned out to be. Okay, so that's what split the third coming that time, was oneness versus Trinitarianism, basically. Okay, and back in the day, what split the Pentecostal church before William Branham came around? What split the Pentecostal church was they had Trinitarian Pentecostals and oneness Pentecostals, basically, or oneness apostolic, same thing, basically. And so they had oneness. The oneness split out of the Trinitarians. Okay, and they said, well, we can. Well, this says this, and this scripture says this. So it's all got to be one. Okay. So anyway, we got to baptize this way. You see, et cetera, et cetera. And anyway, so I believe that I had left one out because I believe that what happened was that they were all, like I said, they were all third coming. They were all Pentecostals. I told the story last time, I think it was, about how Don Parnell said, whenever we was down there having a hullabaloo, having a big-eyed time down there in 2013 or whenever it was, of the 50-year thing of William Branham and all this, and there about that time, he got up and he said, in Azusa Street in 1906 or whenever it was, the original Pentecostal revival, when they started speaking in tongues again for the first time in forever, he said, one of them guys prophesied and said that 100 years from then, there would be a greater outpouring of the Holy Spirit than was at Azusa Street. Okay, so Don Parnell gets up and says, well, here we are. It's 100 years later, and we had a greater outpouring of the Spirit than they did at Azusa Street. So that was the third coming. The third coming was the Pentecostal outpouring, Pentecostal-style outpouring of the Holy Spirit, greater than what they had at Azusa Street. We had it down there in 2013 in the third coming. Okay, when Don Parnell was preaching, when Bill Blades was preaching, when these people was preaching, Okay, so anyway, so that was Pentecostalism all over again. We lived through, I always used to read and listen to William Branham talk about how he had found the Pentecostals and this and that, and how it was the greatest thing ever and this and that. And I always thought, man, that must have been a great experience. And little did I know, I was right there in the middle of it the whole time, didn't even know it. That third coming message was the Pentecostalism all over again. I had found the Pentecostals. I had done the same thing William Branham had done, and I had found the Pentecostals. Let me tell you a story about William Branham was up in Indiana. I think I might have told this last time I was preaching too. He was up in Indiana going on a fishing trip or something, and he was a Baptist. He didn't know nothing, well, I won't say nothing, but so he's I don't want to offend any Baptists. Hey, if I'm going to go out of my way not to offend any Catholics today, I better not offend any Baptists, right? So, I won't let me so if I'm going to respect the Catholics, I'll respect the Baptists today. So anyway, so he's up there and he sees these signs along the road, and he didn't have hardly no food or nothing. He had to buy stale rolls to stay there, and was the story. And so anyway, signs along the road says Jesus only or whatever, and he's like, what's this? So he pulls in there, and it's Pentecostals. He didn't know what they was, and he gets in there, and this guy comes out, black guy comes out. I think it was a black guy. He came out there and he said, you ain't got enough room on this platform for me to preach. And he said that guy went all over, and he was preaching and huffing and puffing and speaking in tongues, and all kinds of stuff was going on. He said, never seen nothing like that, And it was just the greatest experience ever for William Branham, was finding them Pentecostals. And anyway, that's the short version of it. But I didn't know it But I had found, I was on that trip myself.
Yeah.
I was on that trip myself, and I had found when I went to the Third Coming people, Don Parnell's church and this and that, I had found those Pentecostals all over again, and I didn't know it. And and there was speaking in tongues was there, all this stuff, people running around. Well, you ain't got enough room on this pulpit for me to preach. You know what I mean? So anyway, that's what it was. And so anyway, the Third Coming was the Pentecostal message all over again. That's what it was. And then, the whole point, some of the point of the message I'm trying to preach today is to show how that not only did you have the Pentecostal movement being the Third Coming in general, but dare I say, the Love Divinic Don Parnell side of it was actually the oneness. It was the oneness apostolic side of it, because they were apostolic. They were still Pentecostal. They still believed in the Third Coming, but they took a oneness approach to it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So anyway, it was oneness all over again.
Mm-hmm.
The Don Parnell side was oneness all over again. Mm-hmm. And so what they did was, their message was essentially to say that no, good and evil are just all one. Whether you were, whether you understand the message or you don't, or you're in a hellish or heavenlish condition or whatever, everything's all eternal. Okay, I think that might have been one thing that the quote unquote Trinitarian, the Third Coming Trinitarians, didn't necessarily agree with. Probably was that everybody was eternal, even if you didn't understand or agree with the message. Okay, Don Parnell's side of it was more along the lines of, I think everybody was eternal regardless of whether you understood it or you didn't.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so and then they believed more of the idea of, like I said, good and evil are all one. Just everything was all one. That was the whole point. It was all about oneness by relation in the Third Coming terms to what the other side thought of it. And that was what the split was about. Just like it was about, that was what the split was about in the days of the old Pentecostals. They had the old Pentecostals, and it split off into oneness, and then it went into William Branham. Okay? Because William Branham was roughly oneness. But that's the next story I need to tell. See, William Branham was really, he came after the oneness, but he believed, as far as I understood, his take on oneness and Trinitarianism was, he believed in what he called, as I recall, don't quote me on this, but I thought he had it somewhat like a shamrock. A shamrock was an Irish rock, and it was a rock with 3 parts in it. And his idea was that it was neither oneness nor Trinitarianism, but that it was 1 in 3, or 3 in 1. Okay, so he was kind of neither oneness nor Trinitarianism, but he had been through both. So he started off as Baptist, and he went to Trinitarian Pentecostalism, oneness Pentecostalism, because he believed in baptism in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ and the oneness and all that. He believed in all that. But that was part of the things that he believed in that led him up to what he believed, which as far as I understand, was neither oneness nor Trinitarianism. Okay. So anyway, that's where I'm at. I never really agreed with either side of it. I always thought that there was something in the middle. I always thought that that there was something in between the Bill Blades way of looking at it and the Don Parnell way of looking at it. I always thought there was. I always thought that they were 1 and 3 all at the same time. That's what I always thought, because or that they were one and multiple at the same time, because it's like this. If the way I would look at it, the way I always thought of it was that if somebody understood the message or they didn't understand the message, then Don Parnell would have had them all being eternal. Okay, so the way I always thought of it was that it should be broke down a little bit more than that. It should be broke down into, or it could have been broke down a little bit more than that, into the idea of defining what eternity meant. Because if I would agree that they're all eternal, but the ones who understood it and the ones who didn't understand it, they were in a different type of eternity. Because, as crazy as that's going to sound, but, in short version, I think that the low divinic ideology was that it didn't matter if you understood the message or you didn't. You were eternal, and you were always you're always eternal, this and that. And I do believe that, because it's part of the things that I believe. Because as I've said many times, I really was love divine to some degree. Okay. But I've always believed that you could go beyond that and clarify it and do a little better job at it. But so the people who did understand the message, didn't understand the message, there's a separation there. They're all eternal, yes, but there's a separation there. It's like there's multiple. There were more than one thing, but they were all one, all at the same hand. Okay. So I always thought of it like that. I always thought that it's not all just one thing. And it's like this. Don Parnell basically said that too. But as far as I understand, but the difference was that you have to understand. I was talking to the preacher man at work the other day. Preacher man, the Pentecostal church, the Oneness Apostolic Church pastor I was telling you about. Okay, he's my boss now. So anyway, we was talking about some of this stuff, and he said, well, he said, really? He said, on the books, the denomination essentially of oneness, the old oneness message, was that they believe themselves in Trinitarianism. That's part of the catechism, I guess, of their ideology. But they're called oneness. Okay, so just because they believe in Trinitarianism to some degree, the connotation of what they're trying to do was just promote oneness. Okay, so Don Parnell himself said one time, I believe, that sameness, he said he did not believe in sameness. He believed in oneness, but he didn't believe in sameness. Well, that's kind of the same thing as what I'm saying. But the thing about it is that technically they believe that. But the whole connotation of what they were doing was to promote that everybody was one. It was not to promote that there's one and three together. That's what I'm doing. That's the difference. They can say, oh yeah, well, Brother Cook, that's what you're saying is what we believe. Okay, I don't disagree. I'd say you do believe that. But they're not promoting that. I'm trying to promote the fact that it's one and three together. Their catechism of their idea, of their oneness, love, divine ideology, their doctrine of it, would agree with me, but all they've done is promote oneness. Just like why is it called the Oneness Church? The reason it's called the Oneness Church is because that's what they were trying to promote, was oneness. Yeah. Okay, well, that's what the Love Divine was trying to promote, was oneness. Okay, William Branham was promoting. He was the one that was really promoting the idea of the one and three together, the one and multiplicity together. He was the one that promoted that. Okay, and that's why I say that if you go beyond oneness, you end up with one and three together, one and multiplicity together. So that's what I'm trying to promote. And so if you all understand what I'm saying. Yeah. Okay, so anyway, it's the connotation. It's not the technicalities so much of what because like I said, by technicality, they've already agreed that we're saying the same thing. Mm-hmm. But it's what they're promoting. Yeah. If you promote oneness, see, they don't ever promote this stuff. They just promote oneness. That's all they did for years. And of course, that's what they had to do, because the oneness people back there, they promoted oneness. That's why they got dubbed oneness. Okay, that's why that the Love Divine got dubbed oneness, because it was the equal opposite side of it. Okay, now we need to come together and put the three, because look, it's like this. Like I said, Don Parnell said, you can't pull the cloth off the sculpture until the thing is completed. Yeah. Okay, so if I'm pulling the scarf off of this thing and showing that the Love Divine was essentially the oneness message of Pentecostalism, the oneness apostolic message of Pentecostalism, then that means that that message is done. It has to be done because I can't unveil it until it's essentially done in some sense of the word, done. Okay, so that's why I'm saying, in some sense of the word at least, it's done. I couldn't preach this unless it were done. And so anyway, it is time to move on from that into an idea, into the Branhamism, which come next. We've got to have a third coming Branham, okay? And in my opinion, I will tell you all something else. We used to say, and I'm not saying it was wrong, but because I used to preach it myself, but irregardless of whether I preached it or not, we used to say that the third coming was the second ride of William Branham, because he said, we will ride this trail again, etc., etc., etc. You know about that, right? Okay. He said, we will ride this trail again. And that's what we all got up there and said, well, yeah, the third coming, we're riding it, riding the trail again, this and that, this and that. And in my opinion, that was true. But I don't think that was entirely true. I don't think we had entirely ridden that trail yet, because William Branham, here's the trail that William Branham rode. He started off as a Baptist, found the Pentecostals, oneness along the way, and then he started preaching his message, which was better than all that. Okay, all right, roughly, if you want better, it was better. Okay, come on, it's better. Okay, so anyway, so to me, if we're going to say that we have truly ridden this trail again, of William Branham's trail again, then that means that we have to start off as a Baptist, start off as a message person, then we have to become a Pentecostal or become a third coming person, okay, and learn that you can have more message than the William Branham people have. And then you have to essentially become a love diviner. Okay, you have to understand Parnellian oneness. Okay, and then you have to go beyond that, and you have to get back to William Branham's message again, but in third coming terms. It has to be a third coming version of William Branham, and which is what I'm trying to say here with this 1 and 3 together, these types of things that I'm always preaching. And then you've truly ridden the trail again, because you went from Baptist, Pentecostal, oneness, William Branham. See, because that's what William Branham did. He went Baptist, Pentecostal, oneness, William Branham. That was what made him. Okay, that was his whole trail. His whole trail was from Baptist to Branhamism, essentially. And we need to do a third coming trail again. We need to do a third coming Baptist all the way to a third coming Branhamism. Okay, then you have truly ridden the trail again. We thought the Pentecostalism, whenever we got there, was like, well, yeah, and that was true. It really was true in some regard. But I think now we can learn that you can actually, there's more to that trail. There was more to, we thought, well, that third coming was riding that trail again, and it was. But to really, really ride it again, you got to go through all this stuff. Or you can't really say that you've wholly ridden it. But you can kind of, but not really. Okay, so anyway, and here's what I relate that to. We had the book of Judges. Okay, you've got the book of Judges, Ruth. Okay, you've got Judges, the book of the Judges in the Old Testament, and I've related this before. The book of the Judges, then you've got the book of Ruth, then you've got the two books of Samuel, which was, and then you've got the books of the Kings. That's how all that works. Okay, now, we had related this and said that the Judges, the book of the Judges, because it was judges that ruled Israel. You see, basically the enemy was the Philistines. The Philistines were trying to usurp authority over the Israelites. And that was pretty much the book of the Judges was fighting the Philistines. Okay, so what would happen was every so often in that book of Judges, there would be a judge that would raise up, and a judge was just basically a great man, a mighty man or woman. And they would raise up and they would break the yoke of the Philistines over them, like Samson. Samson was they cut his hair and he didn't have no strength. And but anyway, when he had his hair, he went out and he slew the Philistines all over the place, you know. And finally, they got him to cut his hair, and he didn't have no strength, and his hair started to grow back, and they had him had his eyes bulged out, and he was in that Philistine. He was in that Philistine place, and they had him tied up, and he started getting his strength back, and there was all them Philistines in there, and he started tearing down. That was the story anyway, proverbial story, you know. However it's true, or whether it's true is hard to say, but anyway, that's the proverbial story. So anyway, Samson, he takes all his strength, and he tears down the pillars, and all that place collapses and kills more Philistines than he killed in his whole life, all in one place. He killed everybody. Okay, so he was one of the judges. He broke the yoke of the Philistines over the Israelites. And then there was like many of them, and what that was, see, the age of Pisces was the age of judgment, okay, because we were under judgment all the time. You know what we lived through? We were under judgment, okay. We lived with judgment hanging over our heads. Oh gosh, if I had done something wrong, blah, 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 you know, I'm going to hell and this and that, okay. But what it was the Philistines represented essentially the church, the denominational church style way of looking at things. And the 7 church age ministers, Paul, Irenaeus, Martin, Columba, Luther, Wesley, and Branham, those were essentially your judges through the age of judgment, or the age of Pisces. Okay. Then what happened was at the end of that was the book of Ruth and the book of Samuel. Okay. So what happened was the book of Ruth was where Boaz married Ruth and created essentially the bloodline of Jesus. Okay, so that was the marriage. Okay, because we had after the age of the judgment was the marriage to the bride. Okay, 101 here, right? Okay, so that was the book of Ruth. Then you had Samuel. Samuel represented the prophet that was in between the age of judgment and the age of the kings, because it was the age of kings, Aquarius. Aquarius is when we get into kingship. That's what the third coming was all about. You are a king. Okay, we were under judgment, but we're not under judgment of these message pastors no more, and these whoever old pastors no more, and all this stuff, and all that mentality, and all that denominational judgment. We're not under that anymore. We're under kingship. You are a king. Okay, essentially, you're in the age of kingship. That's Aquarius, okay? But in between Pisces and Aquarius, there was the marriage, which is the book of Ruth, and then there was Samuel. And Samuel was the prophet in between there, the 7th church age messenger, which brought everything from judgment to kingship, which is William Branham. He brought everything, in his message was contained everything that brought everything from judgment to kingship, from Pisces to Aquarius. He was the one in the gap there. So he was Samuel. Okay, so anyway, then what happens is Samuel anointed Saul. Saul was the anointed, he was the first anointed king of William Branham. Okay, I firmly believe that was Don Parnell. Unless I'm off on some church history here, I think it was Don Parnell. Okay, so William Branham anointed Don Parnell because he had all the dreams and this and that. He had, you know, or was it dreams or visions of hunting on William Branham's hunting grounds and this and that, you know. And he's like, you got to go out and you got to take the pencil and go tear everything, blah, 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 all that stuff. I can't remember it all now. But anyway, you know what I mean. You know what I'm talking about. You remember him talking about the visions? He said, take the pen and pull it all the way up, you know, all this, that. And then he said about the running faster and faster, like turning into a different animal, and then he flew off like you know what I mean? You've heard all that stuff, right? Yeah, well, Don Parnell was talking about having visions, and he was turned into animals, and it meant going higher and higher in understanding and hunting on William Branham's hunting grounds. You probably heard that one, no? Well, anyway, that was like common. That was like third coming 101 there. But anyway, okay, so and then Don Parnell was proverbially riding the trail of William Branham again by preaching the third coming. And really he was. But I think we can do better, okay? But anyway, and I'll tell you how. King Saul was the first king of Israel under the age of kingship, and he was anointed by the seventh church age messenger, which was Samuel, which was William Branham. Okay, so Saul would be Don Parnell, in my opinion. He was the first king, the first man who went around the place teaching everybody about you're in kingship. You're in the age of Aquarius, and you're in kingship. You're not in the condition of judgment, under judgment anymore of Pisces. You're in Aquarius. You're in kingship. Okay, he was the first one. He was anointed of Saul, of William Branham, Samuel. Okay. However, so he was essentially, Saul was riding the trail of Samuel, because he was anointed of Samuel. Okay, and Don Parnell, I believe, is Saul, and he has rode that trail because he's anointed of William Branham. Don Parnell was anointed king, the first king of Israel in Aquarius, by William Branham. Okay, but then what happened was that Samuel went and anointed. I hope I can remember what I was going to tie this by. I got off on this now. I can't remember what I was going to tie it back into. Hopefully I'll come back to it. But Samuel then went and anointed David to be king of Israel instead of Saul for various reasons. Okay. So basically, I was talking about how that you could ride the trail again, but really we could do a better job of riding the trail again than what we did before, because we didn't have all this information at the time of the third coming. Yeah, we were riding the trail again, but you could do a better job of riding the trail again. So David was anointed of Samuel, just like Saul was. But David did essentially a better job of riding the trail of Samuel again than Saul did. Okay, because Saul had to finish up, and then David was where the kingship, the lineage of the kings took off, because they did not come from Saul. Saul's lineage did not become the one that became the lineage of Jesus and all the other kings of Israel. David was. Okay, so what I believe we've had here is that Don Parnell was Saul, anointed of Samuel, William Branham. But at some point, that is going to run its course. And then there's got to be a David that is anointed of William Branham, or essentially what being anointed of William Branham means is that you have the same understanding of things that William Branham had in whatever age you're in. Because Saul and David both had the understanding that William Branham had, but they were doing it in different ages. Saul was in between David and Samuel in terms of age. So what happened was that I believe that there is an age. What I'm referring to this to is an age, not necessarily the person of Don Parnell or the person of whoever, but it's an age. The age that's in between the Davidic age and the William and the Samuel age was the Saul age, and that is the Don Parnell age. That was that third coming age, on up into the love divine. And that was an age in between those two. So I think that's what, because like I said, he was Saul. It's pretty obvious to me he was Saul. And that represented that age of people, that third coming people there. And then but the next age, our age, I believe, is going to be the Davidic age. And like I said, anyway, it's anointed of William Branham, because it's got the William Branhamic understanding. That's what I'm always trying to preach here, is the William Branhamic understanding, but I'm preaching it from a perspective of 37 years old. Okay, where Don Parnell was preaching it from a perspective of 65 or 62 or whatever, or however, I can't remember how old he is now, but nonetheless, it represents an age. Okay, it represents a whole age. So to me, this is the Davidic age. This is the age that is going to have the anointing of William Branham, just like the third coming and Don Parnell's age did. But it's going to be the Davidic age, which David was where it got to be the actual kingship lineage. And dare I say, fix some of the mistakes of the, if I could call them mistakes, of the Saul age. Because that's why Samuel had to go and anoint David to be king, because there were some issues there. Okay, so, but everybody's got to play their part. Okay, yeah. So anyway, so let me see if I can get back to it here. So what I was saying earlier is that there is there's a ride this trail again, and then there's a ride this trail again, because if we thought that the third coming message was to ride this trail again, and it was, then we can do better than that, because if they thought that King Saul was going to be to ride the trail of Samuel again, essentially, or to have the anointing of Samuel, it was, but David was better than that. And so anyway, let my wife get in here. I got to have my congregation preach to. So anyway, so what I'm saying is you could say that the third coming was riding the trail of William Branham again, or you could get over here to where I'm at, and you could say that no, the trail was a lot more than just the third coming. It was Branhamism, third comingism, like I said earlier, Love Divinism, and then on up into Branhamism again, which is what I've been trying to say for the longest time now. That is really riding the trail. That's a better way to understand riding the trail than just saying, well, it was the third coming. You know what I mean? That's what I'm saying. David is a better understanding of everything than Saul was. That's all that it is. That's all that it represents. And it's no offense to Saul, because he had to play his age. He was just playing his age. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with any of them people that believe the third coming, and that's as far as they want to go. Or low divinism, that's as far as they want to go. That's just, they got to do that. Okay? But there's got to be a better understanding upon all this than that. There has to be. And the better represents David, because whenever Samuel talked to Saul, he told him, he said that your kingdom basically was going to be taken over by someone else, and he meant David, but he said it was going to be taken over by a neighbor of thine, a better man than you. Okay, so what this would have to be is this understanding that I'm talking about. We've got to take the Saulian third coming, love divinism, all that, and there's got to be a message better than that, and it will be a neighbor of that one's message, but it will be a better message than that, because David was physically a neighbor of King Saul's, and he was a better man than King Saul. That was the whole point of it. And I imagine a lot of people would take offense to that and be like, well, you're saying you're better than everybody else, or you're saying your message is better than everybody else. Oh my gosh, what the hell's wrong with you all? Pardon my French. What is wrong with you all? What have we been doing for years? The whole point is to try to find something better. Okay? That's what the third coming claimed that they was trying to do. That's what they said. Well, this is a better message than William Branham's. They said, we know that the third coming is a better message than William Branham's. Then they went on to love divinism. And they said, well, this oneness connotation that we've got on it is a better message than the third coming Trinitarian way of looking at it. And it was. It really was. But are we going to stop there? I'm not. We have got, they want to say, oh, well, if you think that you're doing something better, you're better than this or that. It's even been said that my personality, to get into personal effects, that, one of their beefs with me personally and my personality is that I'm always, trying a one-upper, better than. Well, if I am a somewhat of a symbol of this age that I'm trying to talk about, then I guess I am. It's probably built into my personality. It's like this. I thoroughly think that they're right. They're absolutely correct. I think that my personality is a better than thou personality, or better, somebody who's like, if you tell me something, I'm going to say, well, I'm never going to say, okay, that's good. I'm going to come up with something better. And I'm always trying to one up them and be better than. You know, that's what they used to say about me. That's why they didn't like my personality, because I was a kind of a one-upper, you know. And that's true. I think that's absolutely true. It's probably built into my personality. And I am a symbol, regardless of whether I'm the David or if there is a the David, I am a symbol of, because I don't know anybody else that's preaching this stuff, I am a symbol of this Davidic age that I am talking about. So naturally, it would make sense that would be built into my personality, that I'd be a one-upper. Okay, sorry, that's just the way it is. I mean, it's like this. I guarantee you that there are traits of everybody all down through the ages. Don Parnell, for example, I guarantee you he had personal traits that made him the part that he was supposed to play. That's how it works. You have to, the personality of the person, of the personage or the age or whatever, has to have these certain traits that relate to these Bible stories, essentially, that we're talking about, because for goodness sakes, the whole age of the age of judgment, everything related there, right down to the church age messengers and the judges, it all related. They're all personal traits. I guarantee you, Paul, Irenaeus, Martin, Columba, Luther, Wesley, and Branham, I guarantee you, they all had personality traits that were exactly like that. Whichever one was Samuel in the age of the church ages, I guarantee, or Samson, or Deborah, or Gideon, or whoever they were, I guarantee you those church age messengers had all those same traits that they did. If you knew their personalities, okay, I guarantee you that William Branham had the personality traits of Samuel. I guarantee it. I'll guarantee you that Don Parnell has the same personality traits of King Saul, or at least his generation did. Okay, or I believe that he's just a representative of that age. So I believe he did. And I believe that whoever the representative is of this Davidic age that I'm talking about, and this Davidic age of people, I guarantee you will have the same traits, personality traits, in personage and in generation as David did. I guarantee it. It has to be that way. So anyway, that's why whenever they talk about these things and they say, well, I don't know if I like his brother Cook or this or that, he's a this or that, I didn't take offense to it, because I was like, oh yeah, okay, one-upper, huh? Yeah, okay. So that was the personality trait of David, because you know what David did? King Saul, David wanted Saul's daughter to wife. And as I recall, this was a story, and this was just one of the many times that this happened. And it's not saying that anybody's better than anybody else. David would have never said, he would have never said he was better than King Saul. He would have never said that. And I'm not saying that. I'm not saying I'm better than Don Parnell. I'm not saying that at all. Because David had very much respect for King Saul. He had very much respect for him. They would come to him and say, well, something bad's happened to King Saul. And he would make him leave, and he would say, don't you come and give me no evil report of King Saul. Even when King Saul was basically fighting against David or whatever, they were at odds with their ideology. You know, they would come and say, well, something bad's happened to King Saul, expecting to receive a reward of David for them telling him, bringing the evil report of King Saul, what had happened to him. And he would send him out there and say, I don't want to hear no evil report of King Saul. He had respect for King Saul, very much respect for King Saul. And I'll tell anybody listening right now, I got very much respect for Don Parnell. I may be at odds with him on things, and I may not agree with the way things are handled, just like David didn't agree with the things that King Saul was, the way he was handling things. But he always had respect for him. So don't never bring me an evil report of Don Parnell and expect to receive a reward of me. I will send you out of here. I do not, that's not how this functions. Okay? I have very much respect for King Saul, for Don Parnell. And he may not like me calling him King Saul, but that's just the way it is. That's just, he's going to have to disagree with me on that if he wants. But anyway, I don't know, or whoever. But anyway, to get into the personalities of it and the personages of it, David, what he did was he wanted King Saul's daughter to wife. Okay, so Saul says, okay, go get me 100 foreskins of the Philistines. Okay, which meant to kill 100 Philistines, because the Philistines were the denominationalists. So that's what they represent all throughout. That's what it represented. Because once the age of the kings came, the Philistines were no more. They didn't talk about the Philistines anymore, because denominationalism had been defeated. Now they run into another interdenominationalism with kingship, and that's a whole different ballgame. And I've been preaching about that too. But that's a whole other ballgame. I'll get to that on another message to clearly define that. But nonetheless, just because they got rid of the Philistine denominationalism didn't mean that they got rid of their own interdenominationalism. That's what happened to them, essentially. But anyway, so he's like, yeah, well, okay, go get me 100 foreskins of the Philistines. Kill 100 Philistines and cut their you know what's off. Okay, and bring that to me. Bring their foreskins. Okay, so anyway, David goes out and he kills 200 of them. Saul was like, well, I'm going to have to give you my daughter probably. I think this was maybe the idea. He's like, well, I'm not going to have to give David my daughter, because if he tries to kill 100 Philistines, they're going to kill him. And I'll be rid of David, and because he halfway like David anyway. He's like, well, that'll take care of David. They'll kill him, and I won't have to give him my daughter. And here comes David back with 200 foreskins of the Philistines. He outdone him. See? And Saul gets mad about it. He's like, he's even outdone what I told him to do. So he's a one-upper, and now I got to give him my daughter too. So anyway, then what happened was David went out and he killed Philistines all over the place, killing these denominational ideologies, because that's what we're doing here. Okay. So anyway, it turned out that Saul was a general. He was a general king, and David was more just a general at that point. He wasn't a king or nothing, but he was a general in the army, sorts. Mm-hmm. So he goes out and they're killing Philistines all over the place, and everybody else, all these ites and this and that. And they danced they had this jamboree of sorts or whatever, and all the women in Israel, in Jerusalem there, wherever, was singing songs, and they sang, Saul has slain his thousands, and David has slain his 10,000s. Okay, so Saul got mad because he's like, see, he said, they have ascribed to me only having slain thousands, but they have ascribed to David having slain 10,000, tens of thousands. Okay, well, see, Saul was the king at that point. David is just a general of the army or whatever, So he gets mad. He's like, this one-upper, He's like, this guy's, he's killing more Philistines than I have. They're saying he's killing more Philistines than I have. But what's wrong with that? Saul killed the thousands of Philistines. That was, if I'm correct about Don Parnell being King Saul, then what's wrong? He's killed thousands of these denominational ideologies. Okay, he's killed thousands of them. But the next generation, the Davidic generation that would have to be after Saul, will kill tens of thousands. What's wrong with that? Why do they have to get mad at my mentality for this? I don't understand. Anybody would know that the next generation has got to do 10 times better. Did not Don Parnell's generation do 10 times better than William Branham's? It sure as hell did. It did. The third coming was 10 times better than William Branham's message. Don't tell the Branhamites that. Whatever you do, don't tell the Branhamites that, because they'll get offended. But Don Parnell's third coming was 10 times better than William Branham's message was, essentially. Mm-hmm. Okay, the third coming was 10 times better than William Branham's message. Mm-hmm. And David, the next message after the third coming group, right on up into the love divine, the next message after that has got to be 10 times better than this third coming love divine stuff we've been doing. It's got to be 10 times better. Okay, so I don't know what the big fuss is about. Anybody would know, well, my gosh, it's got to be better. It's the next generation. Mm-hmm. I'm not trying to make myself something here. I don't know who's going to be the David. I'm just saying that, whatever, that don't matter. I'm just, I find it funny. I have always only ever tried to do one thing here, and that was to be very, I've never gotten off a track, no matter what I did, of trying to be, take these things and take these very important things and try to tell them as they were. I don't have no political ambitions of sorts. I don't care about none of that. I just wanted to be very serious about this thing from the very beginning, to tell it how that it was told to me, essentially, if you want to look at it that way. So anyway, I don't know if I ought to preach this next part or not, because that's pretty good. That's a pretty good message right there. Man, I could preach the next one or not. Okay, all right. It's like this. If we're eating cherry pies, William Branham said, then you all can turn me off right now, and you'll have everything that I said. But I've got a different way of relating it. And if you don't, it's like this. I mean, once you start getting politics into it, then but everybody's putting politics into it now. It's like Don's got, he's kind of got the whole podcast thing going now, and like the American flag in the background. And I guess we're going to not only are we going to do spirituality, but we're going to do politics. Well, if we're going to do politics, I'm going to do politics then. Okay, but I'm going to relate it to spirituality. Okay, and that's what to some degree what they're doing. But anyway, here goes. I'm going to tell you all a little story of some things that I think has gone on. For one thing, just like that we had been duped in terms of that the message people had duped the third coming people. I don't know if I ought to get into this or not. It's a good message, though. It really is. Anyway, there are some things that we've been duped about in these here United States about some political ideologies we've been duped about, because you got to understand, when you live in the United States or you live in China or wherever you live, you're in what's it called? It's called a nation, okay? It's all, see, in the church we had denominations, okay? Here in the physical world, in the political world, you have nations, okay? So you are living in essentially a political denomination or a nation, okay? So that means that you're only getting what your country, what your nation tells you. Because if you're in a denomination, if you're in the Oneness denomination, well, they only tell you Oneness. You're in the Trinitarian denomination, well, they only tell you Trinitarianism. That's how it works. Because when you go to one of them churches, all they tell you is what they tell you. Okay, that's all you know. Okay, so you have to understand that when you live in the United States, it's a nation, and they only tell you their side of it. Okay, if you lived in China, they would only tell you their side of it. Okay, that's how it works. Okay, because and it's nothing against them, but that's just how it works. That's why it's called a nation. Okay, so anyway, that is the key to the understanding of politics in general, if we're going to do politics here. But this all relates very well to what I just said, in terms of what I had just laid out there in the spiritual sense of things. But let me just tell you a little story. And before I tell this, let me give this disclaimer. For the first 20 years of my life, 25 probably years of my life, I grew up as a hardcore Republican, okay? I grew up as a hardcore conservative. My family was hardcore conservative, okay? At least one side of my family was anyway. But anyway, well, basically both sides at that point. But anyway, I've lost my train of thought. I'm trying to keep you all too long. But, I grew up on thinking Ronald Reagan was a hero. Rush Limbaugh. I listened to Rush Limbaugh religiously. Die-hard free market capitalist, the whole thing. Okay. And don't get me wrong. I thought Rush Limbaugh I listened to Rush Limbaugh right up until he died. And in what he was doing, he was, man, I like the heck out of Rush Limbaugh. I'll be perfectly honest with you. Okay. And I am absolutely a capitalist. But, well, Brother Cook, last week you told us that you were European socialist. Well, let me explain, because I wanted to explain this, how this works. But let me explain to you all something. From the American's perspective, see, America is essentially the denomination of free market capitalism. Okay, it's traditional free market capitalism, but it's a denomination of that. So you have to understand that that's all you're getting. It's 10 o'clock. What, if you want to go to bed? Okay, you want me to? I'll wrap it up. I'll try to wrap it up quick. Okay, so anyway, So anyway, you have to understand that you're going to get everything through the political denominational lens of the American free market capitalist denomination. Okay, that doctrine. Okay, so anytime you get to talking about things like communism and socialism, well, they're going to demonize that, right? Because that's not their denomination, not their nation. Okay, and they're going to misrepresent it. Okay, so, but I would just say this: I am not a communist. Okay, I am not a capitalist in the terms of the way that the Americans look at it. I look at it in terms of socialism, and the way that the Americans have presented socialism is entirely wrong. And that's why I was saying that, like when the Branhamites tried to portray third comingism, they portrayed it in a totally misleading way. And that's what's happened here. Because, as somebody put it, socialism was not the idea of trying to steal from the rich, but socialism is to make it to where the rich cannot steal from the poor. Okay, let's clarify what's going on here, so you all will understand. Socialism believes in capitalism, and it believes in having a rich and a poor class. Okay, that's in stark contrast to communism. Communism believes in a completely planned economy, a state-planned economy, which is anti-capitalist, and believes in there should be no rich or poor classes, that they're all combined into one, and you take everything from the rich and divvy it up amongst everybody, and that's what you got. It gets rid of the classes, essentially. And then the other side of it, which is the American side of way of things, is that there is a rich and a poor class, and essentially the rich can just run roughshod over the poor, essentially is what it is. And they can use their wealth as a way to bully the poor, essentially. And so, but what you have there, if you think about it, is oneness versus Trinitarianism again. Because what happened is the Americans believe in rich and poor. And they essentially believe in the conservative, the traditional version of things. Because what did we have? If you put Trinitarianism in terms of the third coming, then the old way of looking at it was that the pastors can bully the congregation, rich and poor, that type of thing. And then, or you could look at it in terms of good and evil. The rich are the good and the evil are the poor, whatever, however you want to look at that. Okay, but how it works is that they misconstrued socialism. Socialism is not trying to get rid of free market capitalism, and it's not even trying to get rid of rich and poor people. Okay, they don't believe in either one of those things. It's just that it believes that there should be a fair shake, that the rich and the poor should operate on a fair basis. Okay, that's in stark contrast from what we have here. What we have here is there's no law to govern, essentially, the interaction between the rich and the poor. And the rich, of course, being rich, have all the leverage already to which they can take advantage of the poor 10 times over, because there's no law there to govern the leverage that they already have from being rich anyway. Okay, socialism is that you have rich and poor, and you have free market capitalism, but there is a law essentially to govern basically how much advantage the rich can take over the poor, or to attempt to make it to where that the rich and the poor play on a fair playing ground. Because for goodness sakes, the rich are already rich, so they're going to have a unfair advantage roughly anyway. But socialism was just, all socialism tried to do was just to take the advantage that the rich had and to put an equalizer somewhere in there so that they couldn't just completely run roughshod over the poor. That's all it is. Is that so bad? That's all it is. Okay, So, but over here in America, they don't, they got like, oh, that evil socialism, that's just as bad as communism. No, it ain't. It ain't even close to as bad as communism. What it is here is the rich people want to just be able to completely run roughshod over everything, and they'll demonize even poor little socialism to do that. And it's ridiculous. It's a complete misconstruing of what that is. And people could look at it and say, and I know this would be the next argument, but the next argument will say, well, look at socialism there, Brother Cook. They've got health care. They've got socialized health care. How can you say that that's not essentially communism? Well, I got a question for you all. How can you all say that a police department and a fire department that you have over here in your free market capitalist America, how can you say that's not communism? See, what it is there are certain things, certain base things, like a general program to keep everybody's house from burning down or whatever, that you have, and then it's like a human right. And those human rights essentially over time get to be a little bit more and more and more, because at some point it wasn't just, somebody said, well, we got to have a police force, and then somebody said, well, we got to have a fire department, or vice versa. And then they said, well, if we're going to do those things, then why don't we make socialized health care a human right? So the human rights, essentially, the human rights to not having your house burned down, the human rights to some sort of a police protection roughly, and then it eventually got out to, well, gee, there may be a few other things, like human right to health care, human right to whatever. Those things are totally different from what we're talking about here. Those things will happen naturally and occur naturally as time goes on. We will find more things that we will deem to be a human right. But that has got nothing to do with what I'm talking about. That has got nothing to do with, if you understand this concept of what we're talking about in terms of free market capitalism versus whatever. Okay, so anyway, I just want to tell you all this. That, what I just told you, is exactly what I'm trying to explain in the spiritual. Because essentially what I was talking about, the Bladesians, they took the Bill Blades side of it. They took the idea of the traditional viewpoint or concept upon the Trinitarian ideology of things. And that was to say, essentially, to have a unfettered rich and poor. Because they believe that or they may not be the best example, but the traditional concept of things is that you've got good and evil. You've got people that are going to hell and people that are going to heaven, or are in heaven, or are in a hellish condition, however you want to look at that. Okay, that's the rich and poor, the unfettered rich and poor. That's what it is. And then, dare I say, the love divinic side of it is essentially communism, because by contrast, because it's oneness, it's all we're going to take rich and poor, and we're going to make them all one. We're going to take the people who do get the message and don't get the message, and we're going to make them all eternal, and there's no separations. Essentially, there's less separations and sorts of things. I wouldn't say none, but less. And that's the communistic approach to it. So if any love divinic Republicans get mad at me, okay, you guys are the ones preaching communism in the message, not me. Okay, so spiritually speaking, you guys are the ones preaching communism. So what I'm trying to say is I'm saying that I don't agree with either one of those. I think that there should be a rich and a poor, or a good and an evil, but good and evil should just play on a fair playing field. That's what socialism was. Socialism was not to get rid of good and evil, to not get rid of rich and poor, but to make rich and poor have a fair playing field to play upon. Okay, so that's what I'm saying. I'm saying that in spiritual terms, there should be rich and poor, or good and evil, should exist. There should be a good and evil, because it was like, I think the extreme elements of love divinism would just kind of like try to get rid of all that entirely. And I never really totally agreed with all that. But good and evil should exist. But they should just be on a level playing field. Like essentially spiritual socialism. That's what it would be. Is we don't get rid of good and evil, but we put them on a level playing field. You see what I mean? And we don't get rid of all the traditional the traditional things that got us here, like the traditional. We don't get rid of capitalism. Don't get rid of rich and poor people. Don't try to do like the commies would do and take everything that the rich people have and divide it up amongst the poor. Don't do that. Don't get rid of capitalism. Don't run a state-run oneness system of things. Don't do that. Don't run a state plan. You've got to have free market capitalism for entrepreneurship. Okay? You know, anybody that would say, oh, that Brother Cook, he's a socialist. He don't believe. What are you talking about? I'm the biggest capitalist that ever was. I'm a pure, absolute capitalist. I believe in capitalism 100%. Okay? But it's just that you've got to have an even playing field for the rich and the poor. You can't let the rich just have total leverage over the poor. That's what they want here in this country. Okay, so anyway, that's their denomination. Okay, that's what you should expect here. So anyway, but I'm saying that in terms of the message, it's the same thing. Don't have a love divinic, a oneness, state-planned economy of things. Don't get rid of good and evil. Don't get rid of that entirely and just make it all one. Don't do that. And on the other hand, don't make it to where that keep good and evil. Keep what Bill Blades and those guys are saying. Keep that. Keep the capitalism that got us here, the free market capitalism in the message. Keep that. Okay? Keep all that. But run it at an even keel. Run it at an even playing field between rich and poor. Between good and evil. Keep good and evil. They want to get rid of good and evil over here. The Love Divine practically want to get rid of good and evil. I'm saying keep good and evil. Don't get rid of it, but run it at an even keel. That's what it should be. Run it at an even playing field. Don't let evil or good, don't let good have the upper hand over evil, the leverage over evil. That was where it was wrong. Because for so long we never had any law that could it was always, well, good triumphs over evil, and good is good, and evil's terrible. No, that was not the right way to look at it. You need good and evil. You need them both, but just have them at a fair playing field. Okay, that's the way to do it. I hope y'all can get what I'm saying here, because if you can get what I'm saying, it's a very good message. It's a very good understanding, and it's something that needs to be taken serious. It's something I'm telling you. Forget your personal ideologies. Forget all of it. Just think. Just open up your mind and think. This ain't got nothing to do with any of us personally here. Okay? This ain't whether I like this person or they like me or they don't like me. It ain't got nothing to do. We got to get beyond that, and we got to go into something. We got to think. Think about it. And if you decide that you still don't like it, well, if you at least thought about it, I'd be happy. Okay? But just think. Give it a think. Give it a thought. See if what I'm saying don't make sense. Okay? And because to me, that's a profound revelation. Is the idea that we don't need to completely, it's like we went over into this third coming and love divine age. And it's like that we're trying to just completely get rid of stuff. Okay? We're just trying to get completely rid of stuff. That ain't the way to do it. That ain't the way to do it. All those things were good. See, that's what they got over here, and they said, oh, well, we've come over into this communist Marxist age, and we're just going to completely get rid of free market capitalism, and that's just going to go by the wayside. And we're going to have planned economies, and we're going to get rid of the rich and poor and all this and that, and we're going, it's going to be like Star Trek or something. Okay? No. No. That's not what you need to do. We need to keep that. We need to keep the stuff that we had. We don't need to get rid of it. We need to keep the stuff that we had, dare I say, in the age of Pisces, the good and evils of the age of Pisces, and the capitalism, the free market capitalism, which was the age of Pisces, and the traditional conservative governmental ideologies upon economics. We need to keep all that, but we just need to make it fair. That's all I'm saying. We need to keep God and Satan and Lucifer and Jesus and all this and that. We need to keep all that. We just need to make them fair. We just need to put them on a fair playing ground. That's all we need to do. We don't need to get rid of it. We don't need to go so far as to get rid of it. We go so far as to make it all one thing. That's what it turned into in terms of the message. From what I could see, was that they were trying to go too far with turning it all into one thing. Don't go into communism. Don't go communism. Just socialism's all you need. That's all you need, is to just make it fair. That's all you got to do. Okay, you see what I'm saying? I think it's a profound, great message, really, truly. And I know that's going to be a hard pill for some people to swallow, because they've been in this church of unfettered free market capitalism. You see, socialism is free market capitalism. It's just not unfettered. It just believes that there should be a fair playing ground. See, there's a difference there. But everybody over here, see, it's like you go into Baptist church and, they would have thought of William Branham, for example. They just said, well, he's a Pentecostal. And then the Pentecostals looked at William Branham and they said, well, heck, he's a Baptist. See, that's what it just depends on where you're at. Because I imagine that the Love Divine people would look at me and they would say, oh, well, he agrees with them Bill Blades people, or whatever, whoever, the traditional Third Coming people. And then the traditional Third Coming people would look at me and they would say, well, heck, he believes, he agrees with Don Parnell. He believes, or whoever, he agrees with the Love Divine, the Oneness, and all this. It's just a matter of your perspective. But I'm outside of all that. That's the whole point, is to get outside of all that stuff. That's why I say that the Americans look at socialism and say, well, heck, socialism, that's communism. And then the communists look at the socialists and they say, well, those socialists ain't nothing but a bunch of capitalists. Oh, God. Get out of it. Get out of all this stuff. You got to get out of this this spiritual Trinitarianism, and you've got to get out of this spiritual oneness, and you've got to get out of all that stuff. And you've got to hit the one in the middle. Hit the one in the middle. Like Rocky, whenever he said, he come back, Rocky Balboa, he comes back and he says, I see 3 of them out there. And he's like, hit the one in the middle. And he's right. And he's like, right, hit the one in the middle. I see 3 of them out there. He'd been hit too many times. He's like, he's seeing three boxers out there. He's like, And he's like, I see 3 of them out there. He's like, hit the one in the middle. He's like, yeah, hit the one in the middle. That's all I'm saying. Hit the one in the middle. If you see 3 boxers coming at you, there's only one there. But you see 3. Hit the one in the middle. This is not hard. This is so easy. I don't know why this would be hard. I could tell you all one more story and then I'm going to be done here. I find it funny. I'm going to close on this. But I find it funny that a lot of people would look at somebody from West Virginia, especially, hardcore conservative state, like one of the most, probably top 2 most conservative states, red states in the country, and would be like, how on earth did you get to be a socialist in West Virginia, of all places? And so anyway, and they would say, well, you're going against you're kind of like anti-American. You're going against your American roots by being a socialist, or whatever. You're going against your down-home West Virginia roots by being a socialist. Well, I'm going to tell y'all a little story. You're going against your redneck roots there, Brother Cook, by being a socialist. Okay, well, I'll tell y'all a little story. I think everybody's got it backwards. I think that what happened was I'm going to tell y'all a story, and I can't confirm this, but this is hearsay, and it's like this. I remember Don Parnell last time we was up there, or one of the last times we was up there. He was talking about how he knew people that had seen, was down there on the river. They knew people that knew people, or he knew people himself that was down there on the river when William Branham was baptizing in 36 or whenever it was. And the voice spoke and said, as John the Baptist forerun the first coming of Christ, your message shall forerun the second coming of Christ. Okay, and they heard that. Whatever was going on there. They physically heard it or whatever. And Don Parnell said, I knew people that knew that. Well, you know what? I'm going to take his word for it, and I'm going to say, I believe he was right. I believe that those people, I believe he was right. He knew them people, and they was right. They actually heard it. I believe that. Okay. So here's what I know. This is a little bit of hearsay of West Virginia history, but I'm going to tell you a little story. The story was that, see, what happened was back in the day in the old coal mines, they had a coal camp. It was called a coal camp. Everybody here worked in the coal mines, and then they had a coal camp set up, and the coal company set up a bunch of houses. It was called coal camp houses, and they were all built the same. And there was a store in the community in the coal camp, and what they did was the coal company did not pay you in money in American greenbacks. They paid you in script, what was called script, and the script could only be used. The wife's asleep, folks, but the script could only be used in the company store, what was called the company store. So they didn't. So for going to work, they didn't even pay you in American money or gold or anything that could be used anywhere else. You were confined to that coal camp and that company store. Okay, so what happened was the coal miners had terrible conditions to live in. Terrible. Everything was terrible, and and all that compounded it. Their agony. And so anyway, they went to, and not only that, you had union people coming in, and union agitators and socialist agitators and this and that, and communist agitators and everything else coming in there. And so what happened was the coal miners eventually rose up against their corporate lords, and they went to war with them basically. And what happened was, and this was told me by, I've heard this stuff from a few different sources, local sources, and I can't say I wasn't there, but here's what I think went on. There's a thing called the Battle of Blair Mountain. You can look it up. In West Virginia, what happened was those coal miners went to war with the coal company, and the coal company had hired guns because of the conditions were just ridiculous. Anybody would, nobody could stand it anymore. So anyway, the coal company had hired guns. The coal company had hired guns, and they went to war on what was called Blair Mountain. And what happened was the coal miners wore the coal miners that was fighting against the company hired men wore red bandanas around their neck. Okay, that was their sign to know who was coal miners and who was the company. So supposedly that's how the term redneck got started, was because they wore the coal miners that were at war with the coal company wore the red bandanas around their neck. Okay, so because they were fighting for a fair, they weren't necessarily against overthrowing capitalism, but they were fighting for a fair shake. Okay, so to me, anybody could say, "Oh well, Brother Cook, you for your ideas of socialism and fighting for a fair shake on things, you are you're going against your roots." And I'm like, I've been a redneck. I've been a West Virginia hillbilly redneck. And I'm like, no, I'm not. I am for my roots. I'm doing it the opposite way. I am for my roots. That these are my roots by doing this. This is being a redneck. This is what a redneck is. A redneck is not some Republican conservative that's going to let the corporations run them over and never even try to fight back. A redneck is a socialist. A redneck is a guy who is going to who did not like the idea that the corporations had total control over them and they had no rights whatsoever to do anything about it. You got to have corporations and people working together. That's how it's supposed to work. It's not supposed to be that the corporations run roughshod over the people all the time. That's what conservatism has become, or what it really always was corporations never having to make sure that there was never a law in there in between the corporations being able to run roughshod over the people. Okay, so that's what this is all about. This is all about just having some sort of a law in there essentially, or having some sort of a fair agreement between the corporations and the people, so that the corporations can't run roughshod over the people. Like I said, it's not to steal from the rich; it's to just make sure that the rich don't steal from the poor. That's all it is. But they still be rich and poor. Is that so bad? It's still capitalism. It's still you know capitalism is how wages function. It's still that, but it's just that you can't allow the corporations to just completely run roughshod in wages. You know, they've got to have, corporations have to make money. That's what capitalism is. It's making money off a man's labor. But there's just got to be some reasonable agreement of how much you can make off of that, because a corporation has to have money so that it can reinvest in its own self and do this and that. Yes, it has to. So you can't run it like it's, you couldn't pay a man 1-to-1 for what he's worth. You really can't. But it's got to be at least reasonable. That's all that this is saying. It blows me away that people think that this is something else. Like I said, the real rednecks was the people that's what they wanted. All they wanted was the fair shake. That's all they wanted. So anyway, say, well, you ain't very redneck conservative there, Brother Cook. No, I am a redneck. That's where as far as I'm concerned, that's where the rednecks come from. I'm the real redneck. These people out here that's out here voting red state Republican, these people are not rednecks. These people are idiots, is what they are. They're voting against their own interests because they have nothing, and they say, well, we're going to vote for these people because they're going to protect our interests and protect our what we've gained, what our capital gains of what our labor's produced. But they don't have anything. Their capital gains haven't produced any, and labor hasn't produced them having anything to protect. I mean, we don't have nothing. This place is complete abject poverty. There's nothing. Okay? And they want to vote for people that's going to protect that. They don't have anything to protect because those same people that they're voting for has took everything from them. They never let them have anything. And then they're going to go vote for them and say, we're real Americans because we're going to go vote for these people. Baloney. The real Americans, the real rednecks, are the people who say that you've at least got to give us something. Just something. Is that too much to ask? And not only that, I've always said, I'm just about done here. I don't know how I got off on this rant, but I've always said that, in my opinion, I always thought that the corporations would be better off if they would just raise wages just enough to get people from being mad all the time, because people would produce better and everything. There would be less. They wouldn't have to hire the hired guns to come down and fight them off. You wouldn't have all that overhead if you just pay them just a little bit more and make them not, get mad enough to want to be a commie. That's all socialism is. It's just pay me a little bit more so that I'm not living in complete abject poverty, but don't get rid of capitalism. I just need a little bit more so that I don't live like total crap to where I would rather die than go to work. That's it. What's wrong with you people? Wake up. Anyway, that's it. See y'all later. I don't know. Red button, Wesley?